I'm really pleased to be here today. My name is Ian Swanson. I'm the managing editor of The Hill, and this is Open Mic. This is the first open mic The Hill has ever done. It's a new conversation series we're starting here, where we're hoping to bring on interesting people, sometimes policymakers, to talk about politics and the news. But what makes open mic really special is that we want it to be a two-way conversation. We want to hear from readers of The Hill, from followers of The Hill on social media. We want to get your questions, and we've got some great guests to kick it off today. I'm going to be talking to the authors of Fight, Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. And the authors are Jonathan, Allen, and Amie Parnes, two veteran Washington journalists. Jonathan works for NBC News. Amie is a colleague of mine at The Hill. We've all known each other for quite a while. Amie and I have worked together for more than a decade, I think, at this point. Incredibly, this is their fourth book together. And in a moment of just sort of incredible timing, their book Fight debuted just last night as the #1 bestseller on the New York Times nonfiction, hardcover, and ebook list, which is really a remarkable achievement. I'm going to pat them on the back again and say it's the second time they've done that. Shattered was the first. So that's really something. I'm really proud of you guys, and I can't wait to dive into the book. First, I just want to go over a couple of things for our audience. Please feel free to type questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom call today. My colleague, Lisa Williams, who you've just heard from, she's going to monitor your questions as we go through this conversation. She may read some of them later, very, very soon, perhaps. We also may ask you to ask a question aloud. So get ready for that. That's what's going to really make this on-mic presentation special, we hope. So thanks for being here. And again, super excited to be talking to Jonathan and Amie. I think I've given you a bit of an introduction with the 4 books and the veteran reporters. All Jonathan and Amie are experts on Washington. They've been covering Democratic and Republican politics and the White House for many years. The thing I want to start with, though, actually, is just the book and how it feels to have a #1 bestseller after all of this hard work that you've put into writing a book and covering what was probably the craziest campaign in recent memory.
John, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. This being the 4th book, we very much know that, like, no matter how much work you put into it, and how much sacrifice your family makes for it, and how many people you talk to for a book, that there's elements you can't control. You control what you can. You do the best reporting you can. You write the best book you can. You promote it as much as you can, and then you just sort of hope. And it is. It's amazing to see it happen. It is just it's just amazing the response that we've gotten. I mean, it's obviously nice to have the accolade of being the #1 bestseller, but I think what really kind of hits us is that how many readers have messaged us on social media or personally or texted us to tell us what a great read it is. And that is so fulfilling. And the combination of the two things, I'm thrilled. I'm feeling very lovey today. I've been calling people to thank them for their support. So Ian, let me thank you for your support. And Amie, of course, my partner in crime on 4 books now. Feeling very loving toward you today too.
Let me interject with a new question for Amie. I was curious, do the books get easier as you go along? Or like, was this the easiest book to write, or was this the hardest book to write? Put that into perspective for people who might want to write their own books.
I mean, I think John would agree with this, but for me, this was the hardest book to write just because of the condensed timeline that we had. We started, as you know, right after the debate. We weren't even going to do an election book. A lot of people don't know this, but our publisher asked us to jump in, and we did.
Smart.
Yeah, it was smart. And sources kept asking us, both of us, why aren't you doing an election book like this? You're crazy. You guys are like the election book people. And we thought, we've like done that. We hit number one already. Why would we do this again? Diminishing returns. But it was such a crazy campaign cycle that we had no choice. And I think this was the hardest one because we were doing interviews and writing at the same time. And we were doing like a dozen interviews a day and then going back and writing. And John and I had trouble almost like keeping track of like the flow of information. I think the human brain is not capable of doing all of this at one time. And John is a machine, and I couldn't do this with anyone else. And people thought that we were sitting on this information, which is so funny. And we laugh about it because we were we were basically writing and reporting this from the second the election ended until like a month and a half ago. So
Yeah.
it was hard work. And that's why it feels so good to have it hit the way it did. As John said, you never know. It's such a crapshoot. And so and we're both so thrilled with, the reception.
Yeah,
That's
and we
great.
reported like we reported like our lives depended on it, and we wrote like our hair was on fire. And I agree with Amy that this was the hardest one to do for those reasons. But there is one thing that's easier, which is after having done it a few times, I think we've gotten, at the risk of sounding, you know, uh, arrogant or obnoxious about it, I think we've gotten a lot better at being able to tell the story in a compelling and fast way. And so that part of it gets a little bit easier. Like we know when we've got certain information, we're like, this is the key for this chapter. For the most part, we had to rearrange two chapters, but basically, we kind of know what we're doing in terms of trying to like bring the reader in and put them in the room. And I think having done those previous books made that a little faster of a process this time. There were fewer revisions, fewer versions of this book.
And Ian, you'll appreciate this as my editor, but we didn't really get that much editing this time around, which we were both sort of we couldn't believe it. We were like, really? This is how it's going to be.
It's a dying profession, Amy.
And we were happy to have you help out too and look over some drafts. So that was nice. Thank you.
I saw there were a few reporters on this call. There's probably people who have thought about writing their own books too. Whether you're an author or a reporter, probably if you're a creator of any kind, you have to get used to dealing with criticism and people who don't like what you wrote. Again, whether that's a newspaper story or a book. How do you guys deal with? I think, as Jonathan and Amy would put it, or the young people, maybe the haters. When people are complaining about something, how are you generally dealing with that? How have you dealt with it in this situation?
I think publicly we ignore it unless somebody's made a very good point that we think needs to be addressed because they've come up with a criticism that is valid. But largely we ignore it publicly, and then on a text chain between me and Amy, we talk about how much we want those people to go get lost, and probably in more graphic terms than that, and more graphic terms than Next Star would prefer that I talk about in this particular chat.
Yeah,
That's fair.
yeah, but we have gotten a lot of hate mail, if you will, in recent days, and we've gotten a lot of love too. So it's been, but as we like to say, we're not doing our jobs if we're not pissing some people off. So
yeah, it comes with the territory to a pretty large respect.
And look, there are people that don't want this story told.
yeah,
I mean, there are people who want to ignore it. I would say particularly when you look at the major institutions of, say, the center left, the establishment, what you call like the consultant class that has been running, same set of people basically been running Democratic presidential campaigns since Obama. Like, they don't want anybody to read this and see what's actually going on behind the scenes. And that's okay. I mean, but my sense is that if you want to stop getting your butt kicked, you have to take your head out of the sand. I think eventually even they are going to have to concede that there were mistakes that were made, and that there are mistakes that are continuously made or continually made by the Democrats that put them in a position where they lost this time.
Let's go to
after Shattered, I think, some strategists came to me and John and said, I learned a lot and I'm going to implement that going forward. And we learned this time that they didn't really learn their lesson. They were repeating a lot of the same lessons that we wrote about in Shattered.
Well, let's go to mistakes. Your book certainly goes through some of them. Reporting in the Hill and other places has certainly gone through quite a bit of mistakes that Democrats made. We've probably all got our opinions on this, but I'm curious from the perspective of the people who did this book, what do you think was the biggest mistake Democrats made in terms of why they lost this election? And I'm trying to ask this in a way where it can cover both when Biden was the prospective nominee and when Harris was the nominee.
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go for it, Amy.
Okay, so where do we begin? Messaging, terrible messaging effort. I think grassroots. I kept hearing, and Ian, I can't even talk. We ran a story about the grassroots effort in the days leading up to the election, and Democrats were bragging and boasting about how many boots they had on the ground, and it didn't matter. Also, fundraising, they kept bragging about how much they had raised. It also didn't matter. Trump had almost rewritten the playbook, I think, on all of those things, and he had done new things like podcasts, and we wrote about how Kamala Harris tried to get on Joe Rogan, and that was a whole big thing, and didn't happen. So yeah, I think all of those things were mistakes.
I guess I was curious, so Jonathan, if I could, I was curious if there was even like a bigger mistake that where no matter what the messaging or the fundraising was, it wasn't going to make up for it. Like, is the elemental problem here that Biden thought he should still be the nominee after the midterms, and then there wasn't, some kind of a different process, or, who knows, maybe that wouldn't have made a difference either.
Well, I think so. I would take two separate tracks with this. One is the Biden problem, which is you've got a sitting president who wants to run for re-election. There is nobody who is close to him, who is willing to tell him that that's a bad idea. To the extent that any of them think that it's a bad idea, no one's willing to tell him that because they're going to get cast out of the circle. The president himself does not see the difficulty that he's having, and that is related to the other thing. And you read in this book, you see kind of over and over again where Joe Biden makes decisions that are about Joe Biden, that are about Joe Biden's ego, about his desire to hold on to power. One of Mike Donilon, one of his closest aides, told another Democrat, no one wants to give up the plane or the chopper or the house. And so he wanted to cling to power. He thought that he was best to beat Trump. He wanted to defend his legacy. And in the end, all of those things come falling down, partially because he puts his own interests above those of the Democratic Party, right? And so I think that's part of it. And it feeds into another thing that I think covers both candidates, which is polls showed that Americans wanted change. There was, if you looked at right track, wrong track, 3/4 of Americans thought the country was on the wrong track, which is a screaming endorsement for some sort of change. And a sitting president can offer reform, can offer a different vision for the future and not just continuation of what they're doing. We saw that with Bill Clinton in particular in 1996, talking about a bridge to the 21st century and talking about what his plans were for his second term. With Biden, he wanted to continue, and this is the way he would put it, defending democracy and defending abortion rights. And we're at a point in this election, and I think it was clear for a long time that inflation was the biggest issue. I think immigration was also an issue, and Republicans seem to understand that those things can be connected in voters' minds and are connected in many voters' minds. Democrats don't see those as connected issues. But when you think about change, Biden wasn't offering any of it. And then when Kamala Harris comes in, there's an opportunity for her to offer change, and instead she stays tied to Biden.
How could she have gotten away from him, right?
Well, there are things you could do to pitch forward. You could offer a forward-looking vision for the economy, a modernized American economic outlook. You could do that without fully throwing him under the bus, but he was putting tons of pressure on her.
As your book points out, you can't get distance from me. I don't want distance.
Right,
it was a different phrase in the book, right?
He said, "No daylight, kid."
Daylight.
He kept reminding her, no daylight. He didn't want there to be any daylight because he didn't want his legacy scuffed up.
Yeah.
And at that point, for the Democrats, the best thing to do is for everybody to get in line and support Harris and let her do what she needs to do to win. So much so that White House staff told her campaign staff, as we report in the book, that she should do whatever she needed to do. But Biden was telling her something different. And Harris did not choose, and I think this is out of deep loyalty, both a strength and a flaw, out of deep loyalty to Biden, she chooses not to break away from him. So she's not breaking away from him on policy. She's not breaking away from him on messaging. And then, as she said in a debate, she was asked, what's the difference between you and him? And she said, well, background and experience. So basically, it's the personal level that she's reducing it to. And by the way, Trump is campaigning on issues that so many Americans are worried about. They're worried about inflation. They're worried about immigration. They're worried about crime. We talk about it, this is sort of highfalutin, but we talk about it as like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the base needs of the human being are physical and economic security. And Trump aimed right at that. And the Democrats are talking about democracy. And if you want to defend democracy, you have to make sure that it's working for the people who are voting. And I think that they decided that, the leadership of the Democratic Party, Biden in particular, and then Harris, was not working for those sort of base needs.
And
it's interesting on the human level. I kind of respect Harris for not throwing Biden under the bus, especially after their history, with the busing incident from the debate in 2019 or 2020, one or the other. And there is something to be said for loyalty, but the idea that it hurt her in this case is certainly seems like it's a part of the equation. Amy,
and what's fascinating about that, Ian, is, and we reported this at the time, but Biden's camp was so fearful of her not being loyal to him. So, it kind of came full circle. She was very full circle, very loyal to him. And they
had reason to not be trustful in that, in a way, because of
her own political ambition. And that's sort of what she was looking for in Tim Walz. Like she looked at her relationship with Biden and picking Tim Walz. But the whole loyalty thing, the whole storyline is very interesting here. And, she did try to pivot forward, or there was a plan for her to move forward. And she, we talk about this in the book, that moment on The View where she is asked about, what she would do differently, and she doesn't. They had planned for a moment where she was supposed to say, yes, I support everything we have done, but I am looking ahead and this is what I would do differently. And she didn't. And everyone was so upset at her in that moment for not executing.
We have a great question coming up from somebody from the audience about the debate, which was such a pivotal moment. Just before we get to that, I want to ask you, Amy, you've written 2 bestsellers on political races, both of which a woman who was the Democratic nominee lost. How much do you think gender plays a role in these elections?
Thank God you asked Amy that.
You should ask John. I think that gender does play a big role, whether we like it or not. I've spoken to people about this. I've had personal conversations where they admit to me, I'm just not ready to support a woman. I didn't think she was the right woman. I think that there is, even if they don't want to admit it to themselves, I think that there is a lot of, and also in Kamala Harris's case, a Black woman.
I do always wonder when somebody says, well, she wasn't the right woman. Well, who would be the right woman then? When somebody says that.
They point out Gretchen Whitmer. It's so funny when people say, I could support a woman. It's always someone like Gretchen Whitmer. But Hillary had too much baggage and Kamala wasn't experienced enough. There's always a little bit of an excuse there.
Well, let's turn to the debate. Before, I just want to remind people that if you want to take part in this, you can go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and type in questions to us, and we'll try to get them to Amy and John. Lisa, I know we have a question about the importance of the debate from one of our listeners.
Yes, I will toss it over to Mohammed now for him to unmute and ask his question.
Cool.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. I really enjoyed your book.
Thank you. What do you like about it? We're curious.
I didn't realize how much President Obama was against Kamala Harris being the nominee. That was really shocking for me because he was the first African American male president, and he really had the historic aspect of it, and you think he'd want to continue that. So that was really surprising for me, considering they had a close relationship.
Yeah. Well, she wanted to be closer to him, I think, than they actually were.
Mohammed, what was you had a good question about the debate and whether Biden would have stayed in the race. I think what might have happened. Can you throw that to them?
In the book, there was a debate with the Biden team whether or not he should debate in June. One side said, well, he's behind in the polls, let's shake things up. The other side said, well, wait a minute, this could end badly, which ended up happening. If President Biden had not agreed to the debate in June, does he remain the nominee into November? And could he win? I mean, unlikely, but could he if he remained the nominee?
Yeah, I do think that he would have remained the nominee, and the outcome would have been the same. I don't think it would have changed. I think John said this yesterday, and I agree with him, but I think he probably would have lost. Trump would have won more.
Can I just interject really quick? You guys, because you guys have a great part in the book where Chris, the governor of New Jersey, Murphy, is talking to Trump, and Trump is like, "Do you think I can win New Jersey?" And this is kind of at basically the worst point for Biden before he dropped out, but when he's thinking about it, and Murphy isn't so sure. So you guys think that if Biden had stayed in, it's possible it could have even been worse?
I mean, yeah, I think you could have seen. I mean, I know Democrats feel like this was a catastrophic loss because they lost both. They end up with neither chamber of Congress and Trump in the White House, but it could have been more catastrophic in terms of the division of power in the Congress. I think if you pitch it forward and you say, okay, well, what happens if Biden stays in? He becomes the nominee, and then there's probably a debate, at least one debate in September or October. And there's no reason to think that would have gone any better than what we saw. He was on a trajectory to lose as it was. I think Kamala Harris ended up being better for the Democratic Party than Joe Biden would have been, and also, insufficient to win.
What do you think of that, Mohammed?
That makes sense. That's what I was seeing on the ground, talking to Democratic operatives. Am I allowed to ask the other question or not yet?
Yeah, ask one more, and then we'll try to get to somebody else.
So apparently the ceasefire came really close to being agreed upon in May before both parties backed out at the last second. There's a lot of talk that the Democrats lost 100,000 Muslim American votes in Michigan alone. If there was a ceasefire in May, could Democrats, either Biden or Harris, have pulled through?
Good question.
So it's an interesting question for Michigan and the outcome in Michigan in particular. And I know there are Muslim Americans in other states who are paying attention to Gaza closely, but I don't think that has a big impact on, say, Pennsylvania, where Trump won pretty handily, and that put him over the top. I'm not sure that it makes the difference in Wisconsin, for example. So, could it have changed? I mean, it's impossible to know what would have happened if other factors, if there was a separate reality. But my gut says that actually doesn't end up changing the outcome.
Yeah.
What do you think, Amy?
I totally agree with him. 100%, whatever he said. Yeah.
Whatever I said.
You guys really trust each other a lot.
That's the other thing right now about writing a book with someone. It's like having a roommate, right? Like you're like the same. It's like you and I, Ian. Like we're kind of like we have this mind meld, and John and I have the same thing. We're very simpatico on a lot of.
We got to bleep that out. Thanks a lot, Mohammed.
Thank you both. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Mohammed.
Lisa, do we have any other questions from the audience?
We have a couple. I'll go to one that we got from the registration. This is from Rhonda. She asks, "Are there any options for Republicans who do not agree with Trump to assert their views?"
So that's a good question. Look, they always have the option to do that. The penalty is harsh. What we've seen from President Trump is not only a willingness to punish his enemies, but a willingness to punish his friends. for the least bit of disloyalty or perception of disloyalty. So, they're taking their careers in their hands when they do that. And I think there's always like a little bit of room for disagreement, particularly if it's kind of spectacle. If there's disagreement that ends up in agreement, where he's able to bring them back in, I think that's something that they can get away with. But I think it's real hard right now for Republicans to vote against him, or to criticize his policies without the fear that he will go support a primary opponent against them, or simply turn the MAGA base on them, online or otherwise. So there's a real stick. And the carrot from Trump, of course, is that if you march in line with him, he will support your reelection and he will support what you're trying to get accomplished.
And we saw that, I think, last week with tariffs. I was getting messages from people, Republicans, lawmakers, strategists, and they were all telling me, that they didn't agree with what he was doing, and yet they were not out there saying it publicly. So I'm curious to see if that changes at all.
Loyalty is such an interesting thing in politics in general, and it's such a theme of the politics and the political stories you tell in your books. I mean, obviously we've talked about the Harris loyalty to Biden and how that might have been a problem for her. But also you had, throughout Biden's career, you have Obama not necessarily being loyal to Biden when he goes with Hillary Clinton as his successor in 2016, and how that made Biden feel. And then, obviously on the GOP side, Trump wasn't loyal to Mike Pence, who he interviewed, by the way, yesterday, and who was critical of the tariffs himself.
There's a great Mike Pence cameo in this book, by the way.
It is.
Go ahead, tell everybody about it.
So Kamala Harris's debate prep team is flying to Pittsburgh, to do debate camp, like 4 or 5 days in a hotel in Pittsburgh, and they land, and one of her aides looks over and sees Mike Pence, and she whispers to Philippe Reines, who is playing Trump in the debate prep and is a former Hillary Clinton aide, and she says, Rohini Kazaglu is the first person to recognize her. She says, "I think that's Mike Pence," and Reines goes "You mean former Vice President Mike Pence?" And she goes, "No, the other Mike Pence, right?" And they end up talking with Pence about the upcoming debate, and they ask him for advice, and Pence gives it. He says she's great on the attack, but less so on defending her record. And there's just the randomness of the world. Why would any of these people be in Pittsburgh except for the debate prep chooses to do Western Pennsylvania for political reasons, and why is Mike Pence in Pittsburgh and on the same plane with him? And it's just a sort of kind of an interesting random moment. But Pence is the only person that's debated her before on the Republican side, and he's got, I think, a pretty insightful comment, which is that and I think we saw this in her debate with Trump, she was good on the attack and a little bit less so on defending her own record.
I should mention, too, with the Philippe mention, that John and I tried to, for all the shattered readers and people who loved our other books on Hillary, there are a lot of Clinton cameos in this book, and we did that intentionally.
Philippe is definitely a legend in the books and in politics in general, I think. Lisa, do we have another question from our audience?
We have a few good ones. I do just want to encourage people to continue putting questions into that Q&A button at the bottom if they want them asked. Kind of on the same line of thought, we have one from that was asked anonymously. How much did Kamala campaigning with Liz Cheney and chasing the imagined moderate, never Trump Republican voter alienate the Dem base who ultimately dropped in turnout, especially in blue states?
Yeah, I don't think it was a great decision to campaign with Liz Cheney. I'm not sure how many people they lost. I'm pretty certain they didn't gain many people. I mean, if you're a Liz Cheney Republican, at this point, you're voting for the Democratic presidential candidate, right? She didn't need Liz Cheney to reach out to new Republicans. Liz Cheney's a pretty controversial figure within the Republican Party, and her father is basically hated by everyone on the left and at least half the right. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that the willingness to sort of hold hands with someone who was such a huge proponent of the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, in contrast with Trump, who was talking about not having wars, who was talking about bringing Americans back home. I don't think it was helpful for Harris with the left, and I'm almost certain that it didn't bring in any new votes from the right.
At the
Some
same
of
time, at the
some
same
of it was in
time,
Michigan too, right?
yeah,
Amy?
yeah. But I'm curious to see like how this plays forward. Like Gavin Newsom, for example, and we're going on his podcast in a couple of weeks, so I'm curious to see what he says about this. But he is clearly trying to lure or speak to independent voters and moderate Republicans. And how does this play for? How does this, manifest? I think going forward, like, are Democrats going to have to kind of push to the right to lure people? That's sort of a big question.
And arguably, it makes a lot more sense to do that 3 years out, 3+ years out from the next election than, down the stretch of the campaign, like Harris did. I mean, it just felt very forced. And I don't think anybody was surprised to find out that Liz Cheney wasn't going to vote for Donald Trump. It wasn't some shocking revelation. I don't think it was as helpful for Harris as, say, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. getting out of the race and endorsing Trump was for Trump.
For those watching, this is Open Mic, the Hill's new conversation series. I'm Ian Swanson. I'm pleased to be here with John Allen and Amie Parnes, the authors of the new bestseller, Fight. We're taking your questions. If you have a question for us, please type it in at the bottom of your Zoom chat screen. And let's take another question right now from the audience. Lisa, what do you have for us?
Sure. I have one from Philip, so I'm going to unmute Philip now. There we go. Hi, Philip.
Hey,
hello,
Philip.
hello. Thank you from Phoenix, sunny Phoenix, Arizona. So if not Kamala, then who? Who could have beaten Trump this time around?
That's
Good question.
Good question. There were people like Obama always thought that Gretchen Whitmer or someone like a Wes Moore should be
The Maryland governor.
Yes, governor of Maryland, and he's attracting a lot of attention. Ian, we just wrote a story about him a few weeks ago. A lot of Democrats have eyes on him. They think that he's the future of the party. But there are certain people like Whitmer always comes up. But I think the problem right now with the Democratic bench is that there are a lot of people who think that they need to switch gears because none of them could win. And I think that's a big problem going forward. And I think it's one that they're going to have to address going forward, because they're going to keep having the same messaging problems and the same grassroots problems. And as we've written, Ian, recently, a lot of people are saying that they essentially need to burn the house down and rebuild. And I think a lot of that comes with like an acceptance phase too. I think a lot of people want them to accept what happened and point to Biden and explain what happened there, and they're not really willing to do that yet.
I think if you read the book, I think you'll come to the conclusion that there are a lot of sort of directional pointers. And one of the things that I think is imperative for the Democratic Party going forward is to think less about the candidate from the perspective of their persona and more think about what is it that the Democratic Party and its candidate, whoever that is offering the public for the future of America. I mean, this is a party that is, if you're going to identify what the Democrats are for right now, the answer is almost all defensive. They are defending Social Security. They're defending Medicare. They're defending abortion rights. And that's not to say that they shouldn't defend the things that they believe in defending. But what you're not seeing is that sort of next generation argument that here's what a modernized American economy that works more for more Americans looks like. And I think that until they do that, and right now they're basically an anti-Trump coalition of traditional Democrats and the Republicans who are deeply turned off by Trump. Like that's not a model for the future. It might be a model to win an election here or there, but it's not a model for who are they going to be and how are they going to identify and how are voters going to think about them and their values going forward. And um, to me, that's the essential question for the Democrats is like, who are they in 2028, 2032, 2036 that is different from what they've been for this period of time where we have a deeply polarized electorate and we have these super close presidential elections?
It's clear that there are some pretty influential people that wanted an open primary after Biden dropped out and didn't just want Harris to be the de facto candidate. Actually, let's ask Philip. Philip, if we can unmute you for a second again. I'm curious, just as a listener, would you have preferred there to be some kind of a contest among Democrats after Biden decided to drop out, even in that limited amount of time they had? Do you think that would have been better, or did you like, all things considered, did you like the way it played out and it wouldn't have made that much of a difference anyway?
I don't think there was anybody that they could have picked up in that amount of time. I'm a little curious too, because you go back to the Hillary and that situation. You said something to the effect of they had to burn down the house. I don't see that happening, and Hillary never accepted the fact that she was the problem. Why would you think that the Democrats would be willing to, start over, as it were? I don't see that happening.
I don't see it happening either right now. I think I used the head in the sand metaphor before. Instead of taking their head out of the sand, they're digging it deeper in. And you see a lot of institutional players on the left, trying to cover their behinds and not taking a real deep reflective look at what went wrong and what they did wrong. And I don't think the Democratic Party is going to change significantly until they have a more honest assessment. And I not only do I think, but I know that campaign aides felt gaslit by their own campaign leaders. Donors felt gaslit by the campaign leaders. As we report in the book, over and over and over again, they were told Joe Biden's fine, the economy's fine, inflation isn't a problem, inflation is transitory. Joe Biden's going to come back and win this election. We can win this election on joy with Kamala Harris. All of these things that they were told, and they were told over and over and over again that she was in position to win. Even though the last data that they looked at, the campaign leadership quietly on a slideshow in their last meeting before the election, they look at their last projection and it has Trump winning. And still, Kamala Harris was led to believe by her own campaign team that she was going to win. She's devastated on election night, shocked, doesn't understand what happened because her expectation was so different. And you look at that and you say, okay, what is it that Democratic voters and donors and grassroots activists need to demand from their party leaders and from that consultant class in order to figure out what went wrong and then to change it going forward? And because that's the only way that it will change is if there's a demand, from the grassroots level that there's change, because otherwise the people who are in power who refuse to look at what went wrong with clear eyes will continue to do what they've been doing.
Thanks so much for the question, Philip. Great question, one that Democrats are still clearly trying to figure out as they go forward. Jonathan Allen, do you think that Democrats just tend to completely underestimate Trump? By the way, he's been the GOP candidate the last 3 cycles, and they did beat him in the popular vote 2 of the 3, but he won the electoral vote in 2 of the 3.
Yes, I think they continue to underestimate him. No, I do not always think that he is the Garry Kasparov of 3-dimensional chess. But what's so unique about him is that in this era, the last 10 years or whatever, he has completely dominated the conversation. He has been able to take both sides on issues and be in the middle of attention. And sometimes that backfires on him, but more often than not, it moves things in his direction. And I think the Democrats have underestimated his ability to just completely blot out the sun and dominate the political conversation in this country. And they are so focused on each of the individual affronts that they see that they are prioritizing nothing. And as a result, it makes it look like they don't really stand for anything. And the truth is they're standing for all these different things, but if you don't tell me what your priority is, I'm not going to understand what your priority is. And I think that's been a huge problem for them in combating Trump.
You're watching Open Mic, the Hill's new conversation series. We're here with John Allen and Amie Parnes, the authors of Fight. We've had some great questions from the audience. We'd love to get more. Type in your questions at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Lisa, can we go to another question from the audience?
We sure can. I have one from Amanda from Washington. She's switching gears a little, but I think relevant still. Why do so many Americans believe in voter fraud when there are so few documented cases of it actually occurring?
It's a good question. John, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think my first thing is that people don't want to believe that their side lost. Right? Like politics is like sports. Like you love your team, and you can watch your team in the NCAA finals or in the NBA finals or Major League Baseball in the World Series. And if your team loses, you start looking for, oh, the officials were biased against my team, right? Like you're looking for the explanation that is outside of my team failed. So I think
when it's
number
the
one,
Vikings, Jonathan, I usually just see it right in front of my eyes, and it's like very clear what the reason is. But yes, good point.
But I think there is a natural desire to see some sort of external mechanism at work. If it's whether it's divine intervention or referee intervention or voter fraud, I think that's part of it. I also think that part of it is that there's just so much. I mean, Trump in particular, but I think it predates him. There's been so much rhetoric about voter fraud. And it gins people up. It makes them donate. If they think that the system isn't fair, it makes them angry. It makes them more likely to go vote. It makes them more likely to give money. There's a reason for the politicians to sell that line. I think in Donald Trump's case, I can only conclude that he thinks he was actually cheated in 2020. And the reason that I say that is he was told over and over and over again by his aides that he was not cheated. And he still believed it or seemed to believe it, that he was cheated. And I think the reason is, and Amie and I report this in our last book, Lucky, I think we reported it in Lucky, and it's definitely true. He was basically told if you hit a certain number of total votes, you're going to win. And he hit that number of votes. I forget exactly what it was, in the 60s of millions or whatever, 70s. And then he lost. And he was like, well, there must have been some sort of cheating because my people told me if I hit this number, I would win. And the truth was we saw more voting in 2020 than we had seen in generations, right? I mean,
it's a crazy year.
Everyone came out of the woodwork. The Democratic vote total went up 21% across the country. And I think the Republican vote total went up 14% or 50%. But it was the biggest turnout we've ever seen, or at least, in any of our lifetimes. So, I think it's a combination of factors, but I have not seen any evidence of widespread voter fraud at the presidential level in my lifetime. And until I see that, I won't believe it's happening.
Lisa, we got some more questions from the audience.
We sure do. Another anonymous one. Do you think that the protests, the hands-off protests, if they gain momentum, will enable some moderate Republicans to, this is in quotes, safely resist some of the more extreme administrative initiatives?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, Ian, you have thoughts?
Well, I was just going to say we're not seeing a lot of Republicans wanting to have a lot of distance with Trump, even with I think even with the tariffs and what that was doing to people's 401k plans. Republicans, our reporters talked to in the House and the Senate, but particularly the House, are they don't want to have a lot of distance with Trump on things. And you can kind of see, well, you can see why, both because what we were just talking about, he's been their nominee for the last 3 presidential campaigns. He gets the vote out, and he's won 2 of those contests. So a lot of them are loyal to them. And if you're not loyal to them, he goes after you. He's got a pretty good record in GOP primaries. So even when, people are clearly, a lot of Republicans don't like the tariffs. We can tell that. A lot of Republican senators, a lot of Republican House members, but there weren't that many that wanted to really say that many critical things about them. Some of them would spout out a little bit about Peter Navarro because it's a little safer to criticize Peter Navarro, Trump's trade advisor, but not the big man.
I also think Democrats need to do something other than just resist all the time. And we touched on this earlier, but when you talk to smart strategists, Democratic strategists, they know that they have to come up with an alternative plan. They have to convince people, and it's not going to be based on the protesting.
Although, like, do you think there's so many of the progressives, I think there's a lot of Democrats that want to see their party fight more right now.
Yeah,
and the leaders are coming under pressure from that. Is that the wrong strategy?
I think it has to be that and something else. You can't just be the party of the resistance. You have to be the party with a plan. And they haven't had a plan. And that's the problem. I know a lot of Democrats who have expressed to me this frustration that they didn't have a real economic plan. They were all over the place on all these other issues. And people don't know what they stand for anymore. So they need to go back to what they were and advocate for all these people who voted. A lot of these people who voted for Trump should traditionally be Democratic Party voters. So they need to go back and find those voters and talk to them. And they're not talking to them right now.
We've also seen a significant, the course of these 3 books you've written, so 12 years, you have seen this dramatic shift in politics in the United States. It shifts in different ways, but in terms of how people vote, you've increasingly seen the Republican Party become the populist party, a party that's representing a lot of blue-collar, working-class voters now that was traditionally the Democratic Party base. And, I would tell me if I'm wrong, but I think in 2016 and 2020, the worry among those voters was for Democrats was more, we're losing the white working class, but there were signs in 2024 of certainly losing Latino working class, Black working class. Democrats are still winning 90% of the Black vote, but there was movement there, which is something that's kind of worrisome for Democrats, I would think, John, and something when you guys are talking about how they need to kind of figure out what the message is food for thought.
Yeah, and I think that you've seen from Democrats this this tendency to stereotype their own voters in ways that aren't accurate, and I use that particularly with the Latino community. That Democrats are, they're like, well, if we are for lax immigration laws, then that'll be, something that Latino voters want. And I think that it completely fails to understand the different sets of Latino voters and the different interests of Latino voters within those sets. If your last name is Lopez and you've been in Colorado, your family's been in Colorado for 6 or 7 generations, you may have a very different view on immigration laws, or even on whether immigration is an issue that matters a lot to you than that somebody that has more recently immigrated to the United States. Latino voters, just like white voters, Black voters, any other voter, like, they care about, like, do I have more money in my pocket? Are costs higher or lower? Are taxes higher or lower? Are schools better or worse? Everybody, am I safe? Is there too much crime? And I think the Democrats have really kind of pigeonholed themselves into this place where they are talking to large swaths of voters that they used to be able to rely on consistently or more consistently, with sort of old stereotypes that are not really reflective of individual interests. And I think one of the things the Trump campaign did extremely well. All these campaigns do some level of, like, micro-targeting, but I think Trump's basic core messages were the same for everybody. And I think that, he was like, if you care about the economy, if you care about closing borders, or having an immigration system that doesn't let in millions of undocumented workers, like, then I'm your candidate. And if you want the opposite of that, go vote for the other guy. And he was okay with that. And I think that was something that was, we see it in the numbers. We saw it in the change in Latino voters. It was less pronounced among young Black men than I think we expected it might be, but he still gained a little bit. And what we saw on the Democratic side was a depression of that vote, right? I don't want to say a suppression of that vote, but less of it. So I think the Democrats have to look at policies that appeal to people across, more than just, more than just those one-dimensional lines. They are going to continue to have an advantage, like they have with, various groups of voters, and particularly minority voters, who may care about the immigration issue or may care about civil rights issues, but may not prioritize those, particularly at moments where they are more worried about their own economic health.
You're watching Open Mic, the Hill's new conversation series. We're talking about this book. I haven't shown it yet, but it's called Fight. It's by Jonathan Allen Amie Parnes. Lisa, can we take another question from the audience?
We sure can. This one is from Cameron from Connecticut. You talked to 150 sources or more for this book. Switching gears back to the book. Who have you heard from since? What's the feedback been?
The feedback's been great.
Largely. Is this still a family channel here?
Yeah, let's stick to the family.
Yeah, don't do what I did. Yeah, I mean, it's been great. We have heard from people who, like to push back a little bit. I'll leave it there, but I
love the pushback, Amy, because the pushback we've gotten has been so bad.
It's been terrible.
So what we're hearing a lot of is that people are enjoying the read. Yeah. And there are Republicans that want to watch the car wreck on the Democratic side. And there are Democrats who want to find out what went wrong with their party. And there are Republicans who are interested in learning more about some of the people around Trump. Susie Wiles is a figure, the current White House chief of staff, who I think is very fleshed out in this story. And I think you learn more about her. And it's not just for Republicans, but I think Democrats like watching who's around Trump and how do they operate. I think that's something that you learn in this book, as well as a variety of sort of anecdotes that I think are interesting on the Trump side too. But we just keep hearing it's a great read, that people they just enjoy it. And aren't able to put it down. And I think that's fantastic. But the pushback that we've gotten has largely been from some of the Democratic insiders. And like I said, it's been so laughably poor. There was one of the Biden people said to, I think Politico said something along the lines of they were upset that we hadn't submitted our manuscript to them for fact checking. And I'm like, on what planet would we let the Biden White House or his team choose which facts are true and which ones aren't, especially when we did a whole bunch of reporting?
Typically, you don't send the story into the White House if you're a journalist
to edit it.
First.
Yeah, no. But the best people have come to us, people who have worked on the campaigns, and they said, someone this morning texted me and said, I'm reading it right now and it's making me relive my worst nightmare of a year, but it's a great read, and that's validating.
Let's stick to the questions. Lisa, do we have another one we can use?
I have a couple more. I think this one's going to be a long answer, and I want to make sure we get it in before the top of the hour because it's been asked by several people. Regarding the assassination attempts, what do we think, would have happened in the event that had been a completed attempt? Also, do you think that the election was won at the moment that happened? I'm combining a bunch of questions right now into this one, but if we could just talk about that.
I was going to ask the second part of that earlier. I mean, I find it rather, I don't like thinking about what might have happened if somebody had died, though I recognize that it's a legitimate thing to think about and everything. But I did wonder, I just remember when that happened, that shocking event happened, and, Trump, he does have the flair for the dramatic and everything with the fist stuff and everything. Plenty of people I talked to that night and the next couple of days didn't think there was any way Trump was going to lose from that point on.
Yeah, and in fact, we have a senior aide from the Biden campaign at home with his mom. He's visiting his mom, and his mom actually tells him, "Yeah, I think you guys have lost," which is kind of a funny little anecdote in the book. But they really, I think they were really worried about that. And think about it, it came at quite a moment for them. They were kind of in the middle of this whole debate about whether or not Biden drops out of the race. And so they're from a position of weakness to begin with. And then here's the former president with his fist in the air I think inarguably one of the most fascinating photos of our time, political photos. And he knows exactly what to do in that moment, and that was what was most striking to me about it. It's like he's gone through this horrific thing, and he knows that he has to project strength, and that's exactly what he does. And I do think that was a turning point for the campaign.
So I would take it two ways. I think my first thought when he got shot after realizing that he was okay, and I mean, obviously just such a horrific moment in politics, that we hadn't seen, I don't think, since Reagan was shot, and Ian, you were probably a small child then.
I remember watching it on TV. I remember watching the news on TV. Like, my mom was at work and I was watching on TV.
Wow.
And my father was a reporter, and they said that the press secretary was shot, and I didn't know the difference between the press and the press secretary, so I was kind of traumatized as a child when that happened. But obviously a horrible moment. But once I realized that he was okay, my immediate thought was that he had won the election. It wasn't just me. Sources were saying that. Sources in both parties were saying that they thought it was over. And then Biden gets out of the race, and there's a reset there. So in some ways, this incredibly powerful, scary, iconic moment that speaks to, as Amy was saying, Trump's presence of mind in the middle of the greatest chaos of his life, I'm sure the scariest thing that's ever happened to him. His presence of mind in that, I think, is reinforcing for people who see him as a fighter. And you add on to that the 4 criminal indictments against him and the FBI raid of his house and the post-January 6th abandonment of him by a lot of Republicans. And you go through all those things and you say, Trump, people who love Trump, one of the reasons they love Trump is they see this fighter. And what does he do? He jumps up from, underneath the pile of Secret Service, pumping his fist in the air, fight, fight, fight. And then oddly, 10 days later, we're talking about a new, roughly 10 days later, talking about a new Democratic candidate. And there is a reset. And so I don't think he won the election in that moment. I think he'd already beaten Joe Biden, but I think he more beat Joe Biden in that moment. And then, we watch what happens with the Harris-Trump race unfolding over the next couple months.
Do we have time to sneak in another question, Lisa?
I have one more sort of amalgamation of other questions that I would like to present to you. Looking at the rebuilding process for 2028 for the House, what do you guys see as sort of the pairing, the ideal pairing direction to go in for 2028 for a successful presidential candidacy? And also, do you think that AOC is out of contention? That was specifically asked. So I'd love to get that too.
Amy, you go for it because I have to move so I can plug my computer.
It's a John problem.
So I answer this one quick too.
Yeah, I do think that AOC is in contention. I do think that the party is going to have to switch gears in a big way, get rid of some of these consultants, get a better message, get a better candidate. I think they are really going to have to start from scratch in a lot of ways. And I think that Whitmer is a viable candidate. More Newsom maybe, although he's had some problems recently. But yeah, they have a pretty deep bench. It's just a matter of getting the right message mostly. And I think that that has just escaped them the last few cycles, even in 2020 when Biden won.
Thanks so much, Amy and John, for coming on. Thanks to everybody who was listening. You can buy this book on Amazon or your local bookstore. Fight, the inside story of the 2024 election, the wild election race. This has been a great experience to do open mic with you all. I hope you'll come back again.
Ian, can I just jump in one sec?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, if you read this book and you love it, please tell everyone you know that you love it. And if you read this book and you hate it, please tell everyone you know that you love it.
Wise words.
I will say, though, too, that you learn something new on every page. So that's my pitch.
Cool. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.